right? You have given us no reason to think that atheists can't account for the possibility of knowledge. You've given us Zippo.
Welcome back, everybody. Genuinely glad you are here for this one because this debate got intense in ways I did not fully expect. So here's what you are about to watch. WiFi Gospel comes in with a presuppositional argument, basically claiming that without God, you cannot even justify the existence of knowledge itself. Danny Philalk sits across from him, and from the very first exchange, Danny is not having it. No emotional outbursts, no theatrics, just cold, precise, relentless questioning that slowly unravels everything Wi-Fi built his case on. And the way this plays out is genuinely something you need to see for yourself. Stay until the end, because the final stretch of this debate has a moment that I personally could not stop thinking about, and I want to hear whether you felt the same way after watching it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. Honestly, it always amazes me how far this community reaches, so tell me your city or country down below. All right, let's get into it.
Yeah, so would you agree then that knowledge is possible?
Yeah, I'm willing to listen to your arguments, so go ahead.
Well, yeah, I just asked a question so we can get some
The questions are not arguments. I just want an argument.
Yeah, and I know the whole script here, so we don't have to
and I know your script too, right? Everyone knows the precept.
You don't, though.
Okay, so well, prove me wrong.
You've heard this argument before, then?
I'm willing. I'd be very surprised if I hadn't heard this argument.
Were you listening during my opening statement?
I was, but I didn't hear any argument.
Oh, okay. So does an argument have to be in the form of formal logic?
No, it can be informal.
Okay. Does it have to be in the form of a syllogism?
By syllogism, you mean two premises and a conclusion?
Yeah. Does it have to be in the form of a syllogism?
Do you know what a syllogism is?
That's what you just said. What a syllogism is: two premises.
Maybe you cut out. Maybe okay. No, they're arguments with more premises.
Okay. Well, are arguments with more premises not syllogistic or in a syllogism?
Do you know what a syllogism is?
A syllogism is premises and a conclusion.
Two premises and a conclusion.
It doesn't have to be two premises.
Why don't you, okay, well, just go read a book or something. You can figure that out for yourself. But go ahead. What's your point?
So my point is that I gave an argument in ordinary language in my opening statement.
I didn't hear any argument that was valid or close to being
open your ears.
Okay, well, I'm willing to hear it now. So what's the argument?
Let's do a paraphrase of it if you can for us, Wi-Fi.
All right.
Or if you want, take longer if you want. That's okay.
Okay. So the reason why I asked if you would agree that knowledge is possible is very simple. We all believe that knowledge is possible. We have to.
So the first premise is that knowledge is possible?
I'm not giving you premises and a conclusion. I'm not.
Well, then you're not giving an argument. Just give me the argument.
That's right. So this is literally what I asked you and why I asked these clarifying questions.
Okay, so ask your clarifying question.
Okay, in the same way that you wouldn't put an arbitrary standard on having to make arguments in formal logic.
No. You don't know what an argument is. So you can ask me what I mean by argument, right?
Well, I don't really care what you mean by argument. I'm telling you what's going to happen.
That's all. Well, you have to care because that's all I'm interested in, right? I'm only interested in an argument. I'm not interested in a monologue.
Okay. Can you give me a syllogism as to why I have to give you an argument in the form of a syllogism?
You don't have to do anything. You can leave.
No. I'm asking you, since you want to be so hyper-specific on syllogisms.
Let's just go with whatever your paraphrase is. And Danny, let's just let him finish whatever it is that he's going to say.
All right.
Yep. So the argument is that knowledge is possible. If you deny this, you're stuck in a contradiction. So on atheism, right, you have two possibilities, atheism or theism. There is no other possibility. Either God exists or he doesn't. On the claim that God does not exist, you cannot justify the existence of knowledge, which leaves you saying that knowledge is impossible, which is a contradiction. Double negation elimination, right? You should be familiar with this. It is not A. All right? A or not A? Not A. Atheism is not A. So it's not A. Therefore, A. That's the argument.
Oh dear.
Atheism can't. Atheism
Oh my
cannot
God.
justify the existence of knowledge.
Looks like your evidence for atheism, but we'll go ahead. You just had a premise that just begged the question, right? You said if there is
I
no
didn't give you a
God,
premise.
right? You gave a premise that if no
No, I
God,
didn't.
no, you didn't give any premises.
No.
All right. So do arguments require premises?
No.
No, they don't.
This is where everything starts coming apart. Danny Philalk made it clear from the jump. Danny said this: "My questions are not arguments. I just want an argument." That was not arrogance. That was a standard. Show me the reasoning. Lay it out. And Wi-Fi Gospel spent several minutes trying to avoid doing exactly that. You have to understand what a presuppositional argument is actually designed to do. The whole strategy is built around getting your opponent to admit they cannot justify their own reasoning without God. It sounds philosophically sophisticated, but the moment you press someone using that framework to actually formalize what they are claiming, the structural problems show up immediately. And Wi-Fi Gospel responded by telling Danny to go read a book. Think about that. A person who genuinely understands their own argument does not say go read a book when pressed for clarification. That is not what confident people do. That is what people do when the question is cornering them. But here is what really floored me. When Danny pushed on whether arguments even require premises, Wi-Fi said no. Wi-Fi said this: "So do arguments require premises? No, they don't." And I need you to sit with that, because this is not a minor stumble. Logic as a formal discipline has been studied since ancient Greece. Aristotle built the entire framework of deductive reasoning over 2,000 years ago. The foundational principle that an argument needs premises to support a conclusion is not controversial. It is the starting point. And Wi-Fi Gospel denied it on a live debate. Let me break down why that is so significant. Wi-Fi was using a philosophical framework to argue that without God, you cannot ground knowledge. But when Danny asked the most basic structural question about that very argument, whether it even has premises, Wi-Fi said no. The tool Wi-Fi was using to challenge atheism could not survive the first question. That is not Danny being difficult. That is Danny doing exactly what he was there to do.
You don't have no clue what you're talking about.
Okay.
Right? You don't know what an
deal with the
argument is.
argument?
And that's actually pretty standard for you don't know what an argument is.
Okay. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm not playing your game of giving you a syllogism when it's not needed.
Fine. You don't have to give me a syllogism. You just give me an argument.
Okay, I did.
Yeah, but you don't know what is an argument. What do you think I'm asking for?
An argument is a collection of words used to persuade somebody of the truth of a claim.
Oh, so arguments are just tools of persuasion?
Yeah, in order to know something.
In order to know, so arguments are required to know something. Is that what you're saying?
Do you want to quibble on what an argument is, or do you want to actually have a debate, Danny?
I'm asking for an argument. You're refusing, so I don't know what to do here.
No,
right?
you're being pedantic.
Look, here's why I'm not being pedantic, because the whole point of a debate is to give an argument. What arguments are collections of premises, right, by which you have some kind of inference rule that gets you to a conclusion, right? And so you don't know what that is, because when I pointed out that one of your premises begs the question, you said, I didn't give a premise, but if you give no premise, if there aren't any premises, there's nothing that you're giving me by which that anyone is committed to your conclusion.
Yeah, so you're asking for a logical argument, and my point is that the argument is a metalogical argument. It's what makes logic possible in the first place. What makes knowledge possible in the first place. That's what I'm arguing. You're caught up on syllogisms, and you still can't give me a syllogism as to why arguments have to be in the form of a syllogism.
Yeah, I don't think you know what a syllogism is or an argument.
That's
but
fine.
Fine. Do you know what you said? Metalogic, right? Metalogical. What is metalogic? Do you know what that is?
The study of logic itself.
No. Right.
Okay, what is it?
Just forgive me. I do want to just, we can quiz each other on how many definitions we know, but I think the crowd, to be fair, they are looking for like a debate on theism. This could also include, like, Danny, if you want to run an argument for taking the no position. Like if you say, hey, I don't think that there are any arguments from Wi-Fi, let me run the classic problem of evil or an inductive problem of evil. I just want to be sure that we do get to more of like the core of what people showed up for.
Yeah, let me point this out. I don't know how many debates you've watched on Modern Day Debate, but what you're saying here is that nobody actually debates on this platform because nobody sits here and gives out syllogisms.
No. There are people that give arguments all the time. They might be informal. I'm not asking you to give me some kind of strict formal argument. I'm just asking for a set of premises by which maybe I could help you form them in the right way to where I'm committed to a conclusion that God exists, right? I don't need you to do this whole you don't have to formalize it. You just got to here's some facts by which if you accept, all right, then here you have the conclusion. Well, you gave me one, which was the conditional, if not God, then no knowledge. But that I was pointing out that if that's one of your premises, all right, if that's one of the facts that you're using to get us, to get me to accept that God is necessary for knowledge, it's begging the question.
No, you're begging the question when you ask me for a logical argument about the existence of logic.
Do you know what begging the question is?
Okay. As fun as it is to quiz each other on the technical terms, I do want to, this could be an opportunity Danny, if you want to give, like I said, an inductive or deductive argument for atheism.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Well, to be fair, I'm just going to point, because I was giving an argument. Danny's just being pedantic.
The moment Wi-Fi Gospel defined an argument as a collection of words used to persuade somebody, that was the most telling moment of this whole exchange. Here is why. On that definition, a commercial convincing you to buy something is an argument. A motivational speech is an argument. That is not reasoning. That is persuasion. And those are not the same thing. This is the part that blows my mind. Danny Philalk laid it out clearly. Danny said this: the whole point of a debate is to give an argument, which means a set of premises by which you have some kind of inference rule that gets you to a conclusion. That is not a complicated standard. That is the baseline. And Wi-Fi could not meet it. Here's what people don't realize. If you are going to argue that God is necessary for knowledge itself, you absolutely need a clear understanding of what makes reasoning valid in the first place. Because the moment your definition of argument collapses into just words that convince people, you have already undermined the thing you were trying to defend. You are saying God is necessary for knowledge, but you cannot even define what valid reasoning looks like. And here is an analogy that actually fits. Imagine a lawyer walking into court claiming to have solid evidence, but every time the judge asks to see it, the lawyer just asks more questions. At some point, the judge would say, "Present the evidence or we are done here." That is exactly what Danny was doing. Present the reasoning, not the conclusion, not rhetorical questions, the actual premises. Wi-Fi never did it. Danny identified the argument as begging the question, and Wi-Fi's response was to say Danny was being pedantic. Let me be straight about this. When someone calls you pedantic in a philosophical debate about logic and epistemology, it almost always means you just asked a question they cannot answer. Precision is not pedantry. In this context, precision is the entire debate.
All right, knowledge is possible. Atheism cannot justify that statement. Therefore, atheism is false. The only other choice is theism. Therefore, theism is true.
Okay, so you said knowledge is possible, atheists can't account for that possibility, and then eventually gets you to God is necessary for knowledge. But you see, everyone take into account that one of the facts that he uses to build his argument is that atheists can't account for it. But that's exactly what he has to support, and that's what he's failed to support, right? You have given us no reason to think that atheists can't account for the possibility of knowledge. You've given us Zippo.
I've given you no reason. Okay. Let's go back because I'll just have to read my opening statement again because obviously you weren't listening.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really understood your opening statement.
Okay. So knowledge is possible or knowledge exists is a first order statement. But when I ask you, how do you know that knowledge exists? That's a second order question, right? And when you're making any assertions about the existence of knowledge at the first order, it will inevitably be a second order statement. And your second order statement already assumes that first order knowledge exists. So therefore you're stuck in a circle and you cannot justify the existence of knowledge. That's on all atheistic accounts.
What does that have to do with God? What does that have to do with God?
You just asked me, you said you didn't provide any reason as to why atheists can't support or can't know that knowledge exists.
Yeah, what you just said had nothing to do with atheism.
Okay.
What you just said had nothing to do with atheism nor the existence of God. We're talking about epistemology.
Can atheists use anything other than themselves to justify the existence of knowledge?
I'm waiting for the argument. Are you going to ask me questions? You want to change the subject?
I gave you the argument.
No,
I'm asking you rhetorical questions in order to move the argument forward so the audience doesn't go to sleep.
This is something that precepts don't know.
Questions.
Precepts don't realize that if I'm unable to answer your question, it doesn't help your case.
All right, well, I'm asking you these questions. And, well, the only reason I'm asking these questions is to move the conversation along.
Okay.
Look, I wanted to make a point that Danny doesn't actually understand presuppositionalism. I think I've made that point fine. Well, I'm glad you don't understand it. Thank you for
I'm glad you don't understand it. No one does.
No one does. WiFi Gospel said that himself, and I cannot move past it without being direct, because that line was intended to dismiss Danny Philalk. But what it actually did was confirm everything Danny had been pressing on throughout this entire exchange. Think about what just happened. WiFi finally laid out his bare-bones summary. Knowledge is possible, atheism cannot justify that, therefore theism is true. That is the full argument stripped to its core. And Danny's response was immediate and precise. The premise that atheists cannot account for knowledge is exactly what WiFi needed to establish first. He never established it. He assumed it from the start and then treated it like it had already been proven. He placed his conclusion inside his own premise and called that an argument. This is the part people really need to absorb. In philosophy, that specific move has a name. It is called begging the question. And I want to be clear about what that actually means because the term gets used loosely. Begging the question does not mean raising a question. It specifically means your argument already assumes the very thing you are trying to prove. So when Danny said WiFi gave him nothing, absolutely zippo, that was not a rhetorical jab. That was a precise diagnosis of a structural flaw. And here is what makes the second-order knowledge response even weaker. WiFi explained that any claim about knowledge already assumes knowledge exists. That is actually a real philosophical point that serious thinkers have genuinely engaged with for a long time. But here is what WiFi completely failed to do. He never connected that observation to God. Danny asked him directly. Danny said this, "What does that have to do with God?" And WiFi had no answer. He switched to rhetorical questions instead of addressing the actual challenge. When WiFi finally said no one understands presuppositionalism, that was the entire exchange summed up in one sentence. Danny did not fail to understand it. Danny understood it well enough to ask the exact questions that exposed where the argument collapses. That is not confusion. That is the kind of clarity that only comes from being genuinely prepared. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.